Track 1. The Woman in White. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Woman in White by Wilkie Collins. Read by
Tim Bulkley of BigBible.org.
Track 1.
The First Epoch. The story begun by Walter Hartright of Clement's Inn, teacher of drawing. This is the story of what a woman's patience can endure and what a man's resolution can achieve. If the machinery of the law could be depended on to fathom every case of suspicion and to conduct every process of inquiry with moderate assistance only from the lubricating influences of oil of gold, the events which fill these pages might have claimed their share of the public attention in a court of justice. But the law is still, in certain inevitable cases, the pre-engaged servant of the long purse, and the story is left to be told for the first time in this place. As the judge might once have heard it, so the reader shall hear it now. No circumstance of importance from the beginning to the end of the disclosure shall be related on hearsay evidence. When the writer of these introductory lines, Walter Hartright by name, happens to be more closely connected than others with the incidents to be recorded, he will describe them in his own person. When his experience fails, he will retire from the position of narrator, and his task will be continued from the point at which he has left it off, by other persons who can speak to the circumstances under notice from their own knowledge, just as clearly and positively as he has spoken before them. Thus the story here presented will be told by more than one pen, as the story of an offence against the laws is told in court by more than one witness, with the same object in both cases, to present the truth always in its most direct and most intelligible aspect, and to trace the course of one complete series of events by making the persons who have been most closely connected with them at each successive stage relate their own experience word for word. Let Walter Hartright, teacher of drawing, aged 28 years, be heard first. It was the last day of July. The long, hot summer was drawing to a close, and we, the weary pilgrims of the London pavement, were beginning to think of the cloud shadows on the cornfields and the autumn breezes on the seashore. For my own poor part, the fading summer left me out of health, out of spirits, and, if the truth must be told, out of money as well. During the past year I had not managed my professional resources as carefully as usual, and my extravagance now limited me to the prospect of spending the autumn economically between my mother's cottage at Hampstead and my own chambers in town. The evening, I remember, was still and cloudy. The London air was at its heaviest. The distant hum of the street traffic was at its faintest. The small pulse of life within me and the great heart of the city around me seemed to be sinking in unison, languidly and more languidly, with the sinking sun. I roused myself from the book which I was dreaming over rather than reading, and left my chambers to meet the cool night air in the suburbs. It was one of the 2 evenings in every week which I was accustomed to spend with my mother and my sister, so I turned my steps northward in the direction of Hampstead. Events which I have yet to relate make it necessary to mention in this place that my father had been dead for some years at the period of which I am now writing, and that my sister Sarah and I were the sole survivors of a family of 5 children. My father was a drawing master before me. His exertions had made him highly successful in his profession, and his affectionate anxiety to provide for the future of those who were dependent on his labours had impelled him from the time of his marriage to devote to the ensuring of his life a much larger portion of his income than most men consider it necessary to set aside for that purpose. Thanks to his admirable prudence and self-denial, my mother and sister were left after his death as independent of the world as they had been during his lifetime. I succeeded to his connection, and had every reason to feel grateful for the prospect that awaited me at my starting in life. The quiet twilight was still trembling on the topmost ridges of the heath, and the view of London below me had sunk into a black gulf in the shadow of the cloudy night, when I stood before the gate of my mother's cottage. I had hardly rung the bell before the house door was opened violently. My worthy Italian friend, Professor Pesca, appeared in the servant's place, and darted out joyously to receive me. with a shrill foreign parody of an English cheer. On his own account, and I must be allowed to add on mine also, the Professor merits the honour of a formal introduction. Accident has made him the starting point of the strange family story which it is the purpose of these pages to unfold. I had first become acquainted with my Italian friend by meeting him at certain great houses where he taught his own language and I taught drawing. All I then knew of the history of his life was he had once held a position in the University of Padua, that he had left Italy for political reasons, the nature of which he uniformly declined to mention to anyone, and that he had been for many years respectably established in London as a teacher of languages. Without being actually a dwarf, for he was perfectly well proportioned from head to foot, Peshka was, I think, the smallest human being I ever saw out of a showroom. Remarkable anywhere by his personal appearance, he was still further distinguished among the rank and file of mankind by the harmless eccentricity of his character. The ruling idea of his life appeared to be that he was bound to show his gratitude to the country which had afforded him an asylum and a means of subsistence by doing his utmost to turn himself into an Englishman. Not content with paying the nation in general the compliment of invariably carrying an umbrella and invariably wearing gaiters and a white hat, the Professor further aspired to become an Englishman in his habits and amusements, as well as in his personal appearance. Finding us distinguished as a nation by our love of athletic exercises, the little man, in the innocence of his heart, devoted himself impromptu to all our English sports and pastimes whenever he had the opportunity of joining them, firmly persuaded that he could adopt our national amusements of the field by an effort of will, precisely as he had adopted our national gaiters and our national white hat. I had seen him risk his limbs blindly at a fox hunt, and in a cricket field, and soon afterwards I saw him risk his life just as blindly in the sea at Brighton. We had met there accidentally, and were bathing together. If we had been engaged in any exercise particular to my own nation, I should, of course, have looked after Peshka carefully. But as foreigners are generally quite as well able to take care of themselves in the water as Englishmen, it never occurred to me that the art of swimming might merely add one more to the list of manly exercises which the Professor believed that he could learn impromptu. Soon after we had both struck out from the shore, I stopped, finding my friend did not gain on me, and turned around to look for him. To my horror and amazement, I saw nothing between me and the beach but two little white arms which struggled for an instant above the surface of the water, and then disappeared from view. When I dived for him, the poor little man was lying quietly coiled up at the bottom, in a hollow of shingle, looking by many degrees smaller than I had ever seen him look before. During the few minutes that elapsed while I was taking him in, the air revived him, and he ascended the steps of the machine with my assistance. With the partial recovery of his animation came the return of his wonderful delusion on the subject of swimming. As soon as his chattering teeth would let him speak, he smiled vacantly, and said he thought it must have been the cramp. When he thoroughly recovered himself, and had joined me on the beach, his warm southern nature broke through all artificial English restraints in a moment. He overwhelmed me with the wildest expressions of affection, exclaimed passionately in his exaggerated Italian way that he would hold his life henceforth at my disposal, and declared that he should never be happy again until he had found an opportunity of proving his gratitude by rendering me some service which I might remember on my side to the end of my days. I did my best to stop the torrent of his tears and protestations by persisting in treating the whole adventure as a good subject for a joke, and succeeded at last, as I imagined, in lessening Peshka's overwhelming sense of obligation to me. Little did I think then, little did I think afterwards, when our pleasant holiday had drawn to an end, that the opportunity of serving me, for which my grateful companion so ardently longed, was soon to come, that he was eagerly to seize it on an instant, and that by doing so he was to turn the whole current of my existence into a new channel, and to alter me to myself almost past recognition. Yet so it was, for if I had not dived for Professor Peshka when he lay under the water on his shingle bed, I should in all human probability never have been connected with the story which these pages will relate. I should never, perhaps, have heard even the name of the woman who has lived in all my thoughts, who has possessed herself of all my energies, who has become the one guiding influence that now directs the purpose of my life. Pesca's face and manner on the evening when we confronted each other at my mother's gate were more than sufficient to inform me that something extraordinary had happened. It was quite useless, however, to ask him for an immediate explanation. I could only conjecture, while he was dragging me in by both hands, that, knowing my habits, he'd come to the cottage to make sure of meeting me that night, and that he had some news to tell me of an unusually agreeable kind. We both bounced into the parlour in a highly abrupt and undignified manner. My mother sat by the open window, laughing and fanning herself. Pesca was one of her especial favourites, and his wildest eccentricities were always pardonable in her eyes. Poor dear soul! From the first moment when she found out that the little professor was deeply and gratefully attached to her son, she opened her heart to him unreservedly, and took all his puzzling foreign peculiarities for granted, without so much as attempting to understand any one of them. My sister Sarah, with all the advantages of youth, was, strangely enough, less pliable. She did full justice to Pesca's excellent qualities of heart, but she could not accept him implicitly as my mother accepted him for my sake. Her insular notions of propriety rose in perpetual revolt against Pesca's constitutional contempt for appearances, and she was always more or less undisguisedly astonished at her mother's familiarity with the eccentric little foreigner. I have observed, not only in my sister's case, but in the instances of others, that we of the young generation are nothing like so hearty and so impulsive as some of our elders. I consistently see old people flushed and excited by the prospect of some anticipated pleasure which altogether fails to ruffle the tranquillity of their serene grandchildren. Are we, I wonder, quite such genuine boys and girls now as our seniors were in their time? Has the great advance in education taken rather too long a stride, and are we in these modern days just the least trifle in the world too well brought up? Without attempting to answer these questions decisively, I may at least record that I never saw my mother and my sister together in Pesca's society without finding my mother much the younger woman of the two. On this occasion, for example, while the old lady was laughing heartily over the boyish manner in which we had tumbled into the parlour, Sarah was perturbedly picking up the broken pieces of a teacup which the professor had knocked off the table in his precipitate advance to meet me at the door. "I don't know what would have happened, Walter," said my mother, "if you delayed much longer. Pesca had been half mad with impatience, and I have been half mad with curiosity. The professor has brought some wonderful news with him, in which he says you are concerned, and he has cruelly refused to give us the smallest hint of it till his friend Walter appeared." "Very provoking. It spoils the set," murmured Sarah to herself, mournfully absorbed over the ruins of the broken cup. While these words were being spoken, Pesca, happily and fussily unconscious of the irreparable wrong which the crockery had suffered at his hands, was dragging a large arm-chair to the opposite end of the room, so as to command us all three, in the character of a public speaker addressing an audience. Having turned the chair with its back towards us, he jumped into it on his knees, and excitedly addressed his small congregation of three from an impromptu pulpit. "Now, my good dears," began Pesca, who always said good dears when he meant worthy friends, "listen to me. The time has come. I recite my good news. I speak at last." "Hear, hear," said my mother, humouring the joke. "The next thing he'll break, mamma," whispered Sarah, "will be the back of the best arm-chair. I go back into my life, and I address myself to the noblest of created beings," continued Pesca, vehemently apostrophizing my unworthy self over the top rail of the chair, "who found me dead at the bottom of the sea through cramp, and who pulled me to the top. And what did I say when I got into my own life and my own clothes again?" "Much more than was at all necessary," I answered as doggedly as possible, for the least encouragement in connection with this subject invariably let loose the professor's emotions in a flood of tears. "I said," persisted the Pesca, "that my life belonged to my dear friend Walter for the rest of my days, and so it does. I said that I should never be happy again until I found the opportunity for doing a good something for Walter, and I have never been contented with myself until this most blessed day. Now, cried the enthusiastic little man at the top of his voice, the overflowing happiness bursts out of me at every pore of my skin like perspiration. For on my faith, my soul, and my honour, the something is done at last, and the only word to say now is right, all right. It may be necessary to explain here that Pesca prided himself on being a perfect Englishman in his language, as well as in his dress, manners, and amusements. Having picked up a few of our most familiar colloquial expressions, he scattered them about over his conversation whenever they happened to occur to him, turning them in his high relish for their sound and his general ignorance of their sense into compound words and repetitions of his own, and always running them into each other as if they consisted of one long syllable. Among the fine London houses where I teach the language of my native country, said the Professor, rushing into his long-deferred explanation without another word of preface, there is one mighty fine in the big place called Portland. You all know where that is. Yes, of course. My fine house, my good dears, has got inside it a fine family. A mamma, fair and fat, 3 young misses, fair and fat, 2 young misters, fair and fat, and a papa, the fairest and the fattest of all, who is a mighty merchant, up to his eyes in gold, a fine man once, but seeing that he has got a naked head and 2 chins, fine no longer at the present time. Now, mind, I teach the sublime Dante to the young misses, and, my soul, bless my soul, it is not in human language to say how the sublime Dante puzzles the pretty heads of all 3. No matter, all in good time, and the more lessons the better for me. Now mind, imagine yourselves that I am teaching the young misses to-day as usual. We are all 4 of us down together in the hell of Dante at the 7th circle. But no matter for what, all the circles are alike to the 3 young misses, fair and fat. At the 7th circle, nevertheless, my pupils are sticking fast, and I, to set them going again, recite, explain, and blow myself up red-hot with useless enthusiasm, when a creak of boots in the passage outside, and in comes the golden papa, the mighty merchant, with the naked head and the 2 chins. Ha, my good dears, I am closer than you think, for to the business now. Have you been patient so far, or have you said to yourselves, deuce what the deuce, Pesca is long-winded to-night? We declared that we were deeply interested. The Professor went on. In his hand the golden papa has a letter, and after he's made his excuse for disturbing us in our infernal region with the common mortal business of the house, he addresses himself to the 3 young misses, and begins, as you English begin everything in this blessed world that you have to say, with a great O. "Oh, my dears," says the mighty merchant, "I have got here a letter from my friend Mr. The name slipped out of my mind, but no matter. We shall come back to that. Yes, all right. So the papa says, I have got a letter from my friend the Mr., and he wants a recommend from me of a drawing master to go down to his house in the country. My soul, bless my soul, when I heard the golden papa say those words, if I had been big enough to reach up to him, I should have put my arms round his neck and pressed him to my bosom in a long and grateful hug. As it was, I only bounced upon my chair. My seat was on thorns, and my soul was on fire to speak, but I held my tongue and let papa go on. Perhaps you know, says this good man of money, twiddling his friend's letter this way and that, in his golden fingers and thumbs, perhaps you know, my dears, of a drawing master that I can recommend. The 3 young misses all look at each other, and then say, with the indispensable great O to begin, "Oh, dear no, papa. But here is Mr. Pesca." At the mention of myself, I can hold no longer. The thought of you, my good dears, mounts like blood to my head. I start from my seat as if a spike had grown up from the ground through the bottom of my chair. I address myself to the mighty merchant, and I say, English phrase, "Dear sir, I have the man, the first and foremost drawing master of the world. Recommend him by the post to-night, and send him off bag and baggage." English phrase again. Ha! "Send him off bag and baggage by the train to-morrow." Stop, stop, says Papa. Is he a foreigner or an Englishman? Englishman to the bone of his back, I answer. Respectable, says Papa. Sir, I say, for this last question of his outrages me, and I have done being familiar with him. Sir, the immortal fire of genius burns in this Englishman's bosom, and what is more, his father had it before him. Never mind, says the golden barbarian of a Papa. Never mind about his genius, Mr. Pesca. We don't want genius in this country unless it's accompanied by respectability. And then we are very glad to have it, very glad indeed. Can your friend produce testimonials, letters that speak to his character? I wave my hand negligently. Letters, I say. Ha! My soul, bless my soul, I should think so indeed. Volumes of letters and portfolios of testimonials, if you like. 1 or 2 will do, says this man of phlegm and money. Let him send them to me with his name and address. And stop, Mr. Pesca, before you go to your friend, you had better take a note. Banknote? I say indignantly. No banknote, if you please, till my brave Englishman has earned it first. Banknote? Says Papa in great surprise. Who talked of banknote? I mean a note of the terms, a memorandum of what he is expected to do. Go on with your lesson, Mr. Pesca, and I will give you the necessary extract from my friend's letter. Down sits the man of merchandise and money to his pen, ink, and paper, and down I go once again into the hell of Dante, with the 3 young misses after me. In 10 minutes' time the note is written. The boots of Papa are creaking themselves away in the passage outside. From that moment, on my faith and soul and honour, I know nothing more. The glorious thought that I have caught my opportunity at last, and that my grateful service for my dearest friend in the world is as good as done already, flies up into my head and makes me drunk. How I pull my young missus and myself out of the infernal region again, and how my other business is done afterwards, how my little bit of dinner slides itself down my throat, I know no more than a man in the moon. Enough for me that here I am, with the mighty merchant's note in my hand, as large as life, as hot as fire, and as happy as a king. Ha, ha, ha! Right, all right! Here the Professor waved the memorandum of terms above his head, and ended his long and voluble narrative with his shrill Italian parody of an English cheer. My mother rose the moment he had done, with flushed cheeks and brightened eyes. She caught the little man warmly by both hands. "My dear, good Pesca," she said, "I never doubted your true affection for Walter, but I am more than ever persuaded of it now." "I am sure we are very much obliged to Professor Pesca for Walter's sake," added Sarah. She half rose while she spoke, as if to approach the arm-chair in her turn, but observing that Pesca was rapturously kissing my mother's hands, looked serious and resumed her seat. "If the familiar little man treats my mother that way, how will he treat me?" Faces sometimes tell truth, and that was unquestionably the thought in Sarah's mind as she sat down again. Although I myself was gratefully sensible of the kindness of Pesca's motives, my spirits were hardly so much elevated as they ought to have been by the prospect of future employment now placed before me. When the Professor had quite done with my mother's hand, and when I had warmly thanked him for his interference on my behalf, I asked to be allowed to look at the note of terms which his respectable patron had drawn up for my inspection. Pesca handed me the paper with a triumphant flourish of the hand. "Read," said the little man majestically. "I promise you, my friend, the writing of the Golden Papa speaks with a tongue of trumpets for itself." The note was plain, straightforward, and comprehensive, at any rate. It informed me, first, that Frederick Fairley, Esquire, of Limmeridge House, Cumberland, wanted to engage the services of a thoroughly competent drawing-master for a period of 4 months certain. Second, that the duties which the master was expected to perform would be of a twofold kind. He was to superintend the instruction of 2 young ladies in the art of painting in water-colours, and he was to devote his leisure time afterwards to the business of repairing and mounting a valuable collection of drawings which had suffered to fall into a condition of total neglect. Thirdly, that the terms offered to the person who should undertake and properly perform these duties were 4 guineas a week, and that he was to reside at Limmeridge House, and that he was to be treated there on the footing of a gentleman. Fourthly, and lastly, that no person need think of applying for this situation unless he could furnish the most unexceptionable references to character and abilities. The references were to be sent to Mr. Fairlie's friend in London, who was empowered to conclude all necessary arrangements. These instructions were followed by the name and address of Pesca's employer in Portland Place, and there the note or memorandum ended. The prospect which this offer of an engagement held out was certainly an attractive one. The employment was likely to be both easy and agreeable. It was proposed to me at the autumn time of the year, when I was least occupied, and the terms, judging by my personal experience in my profession, were surprisingly liberal. I knew this. I knew that I ought to consider myself very fortunate if I succeeded in securing the offered employment. And yet, no sooner had I read the memorandum than I felt an inexplicable unwillingness within me to stir in the matter. I had never in the whole of my previous experience found my duty and my inclination so painfully and so unaccountably at variance as I found them now. "Oh, Walter, your father never had such a chance as this," said my mother, when she had read the note of terms and handed it back to me. "Such distinguished people to know," remarked Sarah, straightening herself in the chair, "and on such gratifying terms of equality, too." Yes, the terms in every sense are tempting enough," I replied impatiently. "But before I send my testimonials, I should like a little time to consider." "Consider!" exclaimed my mother. "Why, Walter, what is the matter with you?" "Consider!" echoed my sister. "What a very extraordinary thing to say under the circumstances." "Consider!" chimed in the Professor. "What is there to consider about? Answer me this. Have you not been complaining of your health? And have you not been longing for what you call a smack of the country breeze? Well, there in your hand is the paper that offers you perpetual choking mouthfuls of country breeze for 4 months' time. Is it not so? Ha! Again you want money. Well, is 4 golden guineas a week nothing? My soul, bless my soul! Only give it to me, and my boots shall creak like the golden papas with a sense of overpowering richness of the man who walks in them. 4 guineas a week! And more than that, the charming society of 2 young misses, and more than that, your bed, your breakfast, your dinner, and your gorging English teas and lunches, and drinks of foaming beer, and all for nothing. Why, Walter, my dear good friend, deuce what the deuce! For the first time in my life I have not eyes enough in my head to look and wonder at you." Neither my mother's evident astonishment at my behaviour, nor Pesca's fervid enumeration of the advantages offered to me by the new employment, had any effect in shaking my unreasonable disinclination to go to Limmeridge House. After starting all the petty objections that I could think of to going to Cumberland, and after hearing them answered one after another, to my own complete discomfiture, I tried to set up a last obstacle by asking what was to become of my pupils in London while I was teaching Mr. Fairlie's young ladies to sketch from nature. The obvious answer to this was that the greater part of them would be away on their autumn travels, and that the few who remained at home might be confided to the care of one of my brother drawing-masters, whose pupils I had once taken off his hands under similar circumstances. My sister reminded me that this gentleman had expressly placed his services at my disposal during the present season, in case I wished to leave town. My mother seriously appealed to me not to let an idle caprice stand in the way of my own interests and my own health, and Pesca piteously entreated that I would not wound him to the heart by rejecting the first grateful offer of service that he had been able to make to the friend who had saved his life. The evident sincerity and affection which inspired these remonstrances would have influenced any man with an atom of good feeling in his composition, though I could not conquer my own unaccountable perversity. I had at least virtue enough to be heartily ashamed of it, and to end the discussion pleasantly by giving way, and promising to do all that was wanted of me. The rest of the evening passed merrily enough in humorous anticipations of my coming life with the 2 young ladies in Cumberland. Pesca, inspired by our national grog, which appeared to get into his head in the most marvellous manner, 5 minutes after it had gone down his throat, asserted his claims to be considered a complete Englishman by making a series of speeches in rapid succession, proposing my mother's health, my sister's health, my health, and the healths in the mass of Mr. Fairley and the two young misses, pathetically returning thanks himself immediately afterwards for the whole party. "A secret, Walter," said my little friend confidentially, as we walked home together. "I am flushed by the recollection of my own eloquence. My soul bursts itself with ambition. One of these days I go into your noble Parliament. It is the dream of my whole life to be Honourable Pesca MP." The next morning I sent my testimonials to the Professor's employer in Portland Place. 3 days passed, and I concluded with secret satisfaction that my papers had not been found sufficiently explicit. On the 4th day, however, an answer came. It announced that Mr. Fairley had accepted my services and requested me to start for Cumberland immediately. All the necessary instructions for my journey were carefully and clearly added in a postscript. I made my arrangements, unwillingly enough, for leaving London early the next day. Towards evening Pesca looked in, on his way to a dinner party, to bid me good-bye. "I shall dry my tears in your absence," said the Professor gaily, "with this glorious thought. It is my auspicious hand that has given the first push to your fortune in the world. Go, my friend. When your sun shines in Cumberland, English proverb, in the name of heaven make your hay. Marry one of the young misses. Become Honourable Hartright MP. And when you are at the top of the ladder, remember that Pesca at the bottom has done it all." I tried to laugh with my little friend over his parting jest, but my spirits were not to be commanded. Something jarred in me almost painfully while he was speaking his light farewell words. When I was left alone again, nothing remained to be done but to walk to the Hampstead cottage and bid my mother and Sarah good-bye. 4. The heat had been painfully oppressive all day, and it was now a close and sultry night. My mother and sister had spoken so many last words, and had begged me to wait another 5 minutes so many times, that it was nearly midnight when the servant locked the garden gate behind me. I walked forward a few paces on the shortest way back to London, then stopped and hesitated. The moon was full and broad in the dark blue, starless sky, and the broken ground of the heath looked wild enough in the mysterious light to be hundreds of miles away from the great city that lay beneath it. The idea of descending any sooner than I could help into the heat and gloom of London repelled me. The prospect of going to bed in my airless chambers, and the prospect of gradual suffocation, seemed in my present restless state of mind and body to be one and the same thing. I determined to stroll home in the purer air by the most roundabout way I could take, to follow the white winding paths across the lonely heath, and to approach London through its most open suburb, by striking into Finchley Road, and so getting back in the cool of the new morning to the western side of Regent's Park. I wound my way down slowly over the heath, enjoying the divine stillness of the scene, and admiring the soft alternations of light and shade as they followed each other over the broken ground on every side of me. So long as I was proceeding through this first and prettiest part of my night walk, my mind remained passively open to the impressions produced by the view, and I thought but little on any subject. Indeed, so far as my own sensations were concerned, I can hardly say I thought at all. But when I had left the heath and turned into the by-road, where there was less to see, the ideas naturally engendered by the approaching change in my habits and occupations gradually drew more and more of my attention exclusively to themselves. By the time I had arrived at the end of the road, I had become completely absorbed in my own fanciful visions of Limmeridge House, of Mr. Fairley, and of the two ladies whose practice in the art of water-colour painting I was so soon to superintend. I had now arrived at that particular point on my walk where 4 roads met: the road to Hampstead, along which I had returned, the road to Finchley, the road to West End, and the road back to London. I had mechanically turned in this latter direction, and was strolling along the lonely high road, idly wondering, I remember, what the Cumberland young ladies would look like, when in one moment every drop of blood in my body was brought to a stop, by the touch of a hand laid lightly and suddenly on my shoulder from behind me. I turned on the instant, with my fingers tightening round the handle of my stick. There, in the middle of the broad, bright high road, there, as if it had that moment sprung out of the earth or dropped from the heaven, stood the figure of a solitary woman, dressed from head to foot in white garments, her face bent in grave inquiry on mine, her hand pointing to the dark cloud over London as I faced her. I was far too seriously startled by the suddenness with which this extraordinary apparition stood before me in the dead of night and in that lonely place, to ask what she wanted. The strange woman spoke first. "Is that the road to London?" she said. I looked attentively at her as she put that singular question to me. It was nearly 1 o'clock. All I could discern distinctly by the moonlight was a colourless, youthful face, meagre and sharp to look at about the cheeks and chin, large, grave, wistful, attentive eyes, nervous, uncertain lips, and light hair of a pale brownish-yellow hue. There was nothing wild, nothing immodest in her manner. It was quiet and self-controlled, a little melancholy and a little touched by suspicion. Not exactly the manner of a lady, but at the same time not the manner of a woman in the humblest rank of life. The voice, little as I had yet heard of it, had something curiously still and mechanical in its tones, and the utterance was remarkably rapid. She held a small bag in her hand, and her dress, bonnet, shawl, and gown, all of white, was, so far as I could guess, certainly not composed of very delicate or very expensive materials. Her figure was slight and rather above the average height. Her gait and actions free from the slightest approach to extravagance. This was all I could observe of her in the dim light and under the perplexingly strange circumstances of our meeting. What sort of a woman she was, and how she came to be out alone in the high road an hour after midnight, I altogether failed to guess. The one thing of which I felt certain was that the grossest of mankind could not have misconstrued her motive in speaking, even at that suspiciously late hour and in that suspiciously lonely place. "Did you hear me?" she said, still quietly and rapidly, and without the least fretfulness or impatience. I asked if that was the way to London. "Yes," I replied, "that's the way. It leads to St. John's Wood and Regent's Park. You must excuse my not answering you before. I was rather startled by your sudden appearance in the road, and I am, even now, quite unable to account for it." "You don't suspect me of doing anything wrong, do you?" "I have done nothing wrong. I have met with an accident. I am very unfortunate in being here alone so late. Why do you suspect me of doing wrong?" She spoke with unnecessary earnestness and agitation, and shrank back from me several paces. I did my best to reassure her. "Oh, pray don't suppose that I have any idea of suspecting you," I said, "or any other wish than to be of assistance to you, if I can. I only wondered at your appearance in the road, because it seemed to me to be empty the instant before I saw you." She turned and pointed back to a place at the junction of the road to London and the road to Hampstead, where there is a gap in the hedge. "I heard you coming," she said, "and hid there to see what sort of man you were before I risked speaking. I doubted and feared about it till you passed, and then I was obliged to steal after you and touch you." "Steal after me and touch me? Why not call to me?" Strange, to say the least of it. "May I trust you?" she asked. "You don't think the worse of me because I have met with an accident?" She stopped in confusion, shifted her bag from one hand to the other, and sighed bitterly. The loneliness and helplessness of the woman touched me. The natural impulse to assist her and to spare her got the better of the judgment, the caution, the worldly tact which an older, wiser, and colder man might have summoned to help him in this strange emergency. "You may trust me for any harmless purpose," I said. "If it troubles you to explain your strange situation to me, don't think of returning to the subject again. I've no right to ask you for any explanations. Tell me how I can help you, and if I can, I will." "You're very kind, and I'm very, very thankful to have met you." The first touch of womanly tenderness that I had heard from her trembled in her voice as she said these words. But no tears glistened in those large, wistfully attentive eyes of hers, which were still fixed on me. "I've only been in London once before," she went on, more and more rapidly, "and I know nothing about that side of it yonder. Can I get a fly or a carriage of any kind? Is it too late? I don't know. If you could show me where to get a fly, and if you will only promise not to interfere with me, and to let me leave you when and how I please. I have a friend in London who'll be glad to receive me. I want nothing else. Will you promise?" She looked anxiously up and down the road, shifted her bag again from one hand to the other, and repeated the words, "Will you promise?" with a look hard in my face, with a pleading fear and confusion that it troubled me to see. What could I do? Here was a stranger utterly and helplessly at my mercy, and that stranger a forlorn woman. No house was near. No one was passing whom I could consult. No earthly right existed on my part to give me a power of control over her, even if I had known how to exercise it. I trace these lines self-distrustfully, with the shadows of after events darkening the very paper I write on. And still I say, what could I do? What I did do was try and gain time by questioning her. "Are you sure that your friend in London will receive you at such a late hour as this?" I said. "Quite sure. Only say you will let me leave you when and how I please. Only say you won't interfere with me. Will you promise?" As she repeated the words for the third time, she came close to me and laid her hand, with a sudden gentle stealthiness, on my bosom. A thin hand, a cold hand when I removed it with mine, even on that sultry night. Remember that I was young. Remember that the hand that touched me was a woman's. "Will you promise?" "Yes." One word. The little familiar word that is on everyone's lips every hour of the day. Oh, me! And I tremble now when I write it. We set our faces towards London, and walked on together in the first still hour of the new day. I and this woman, whose name, whose character, whose story, whose objects in life, whose very presence at my side at that moment, were fathomless mysteries to me. It was like a dream. Was I Walter Hartright? Was this the well-known, uneventful road where holiday people strolled on Sundays? Had I really left, little more than an hour since, the quiet, decent, conventionally domestic atmosphere of my mother's cottage? I was too bewildered, too conscious also of a vague sense of something like self-reproach, to speak to my strange companion for some minutes. It was her voice again that first broke the silence between us. "I want to ask you something," she said suddenly. "Do you know many people in London?" "Yes, a great many." "Many men of rank and title?" There was an unmistakable tone of suspicion in the strange question. I hesitated about answering. "Some," I said, after a moment's silence. "Many?" She came to a full stop, then looked at me searchingly in the face. "Many men of the rank of baronet?" Too much astonished to reply, I questioned her in my turn. "Why do you ask?" "Because I hope for my own sake that there is one baronet that you do not know." "Will you tell me his name?" "I can't. I daren't. I forget myself when I mention it." She spoke loudly and almost fiercely, raised her clenched hand in the air and shook it passionately, and then on a sudden controlled herself again, and added in tones lowered to a whisper, "Tell me which of them you know." I could hardly refuse to humour her in such a trifle, and I mentioned 3 names. 2 the names of fathers of families whose daughters I taught. 1 the name of a bachelor who had once taken me in a cruise on his yacht to make sketches for him. "Ah, you don't know him," she said with a sigh of relief. "Are you a man of rank and title yourself?" "Far from it. I'm only a drawing master." As the reply passed my lips, a little bitterly perhaps, she took my arm with the abruptness which characterized all her actions. "Not a man of rank and title," she repeated to herself. "Thank God, I may trust him." I had hitherto contrived to master my curiosity out of consideration for my companion, but it got the better of me now. "I'm afraid you have serious reason to complain of some man of rank and title?" I asked. "I'm afraid the baronet, whose name you are unwilling to mention to me, has done you some grievous wrong. Is he the cause of your being out here at this strange time of night?" "Don't ask me. Don't make me talk of it," she answered. "I'm not fit now. I have been cruelly used and cruelly wronged. You will be kinder than ever if you will walk on fast and not speak to me. I sadly want to quiet myself, if I can." We moved forward again at a quick pace, and for half an hour, at least, not a word passed on either side. From time to time, being forbidden to make any more inquiries, I stole a look at her face. It was always the same, the lips close shut, the brow frowning, the eyes looking straight forward, eagerly yet absently. We had reached the first houses, and were close to the new Wesleyan College, before her set features relaxed, and she spoke once more. "Do you live in London?" she said. "Yes," I answered. It struck me that she might have formed some intention of appealing to me for assistance or advice, and that I ought to spare her a possible disappointment by warning her of my approaching absence from home. So I added, "But to-morrow I shall be away from London for some time. I'm going into the country." "Where?" she asked. "North or south?" "North, to Cumberland." "Cumberland?" She repeated the word tenderly. "Ah, I wish I was going there too. I was once happy in Cumberland." I tried again to lift the veil that hung between this woman and me. "Perhaps you were born," I said, "in that beautiful lake country." "No," she answered. "I was born in Hampshire, but I once went to school for a little while in Cumberland. Lakes? I don't remember any lakes. It's Limmeridge village and Limmeridge House I should like to see again." It was my turn now to stop suddenly. In the excited state of my curiosity at that moment, the chance reference to Mr. Fairlie's place of residence on the lips of my strange companion staggered me with astonishment. "Did you hear anybody calling after us?" she asked, looking up and down the road affrightedly. The instant I stopped. No, I was only struck by the name of Limmeridge House. I heard it mentioned by some Cumberland people a few days since." "Ah, not my people. Mrs. Fairlie is dead, and her husband is dead, and their little girl may be married and gone away by this time. I can't say who lives at Limmeridge now. If any more are left there of that name, I only know I love them for Mrs. Fairlie's sake." She seemed about to say more, but while she was speaking we came within view of the turnpike at the top of the Avenue Road. Her hand tightened round my arm, and she looked anxiously at the gate before us. "Is the turnpike man looking out?" she asked. He was not looking out. No one else was near the place when we passed through the gate. The sight of the gas lamps and houses seemed to agitate her and to make her impatient. "This is London," she said. "Do you see any carriage I can get? I'm tired and frightened. I want to shut myself in and be driven away." I explained to her that we must walk a little further to get to a cab stand, unless we were fortunate enough to meet with an empty vehicle, and then I tried to resume the subject of Cumberland. It was useless. The idea of shutting herself in and being driven away had now got full possession of her mind. She could think and talk of nothing else. We had hardly proceeded a third of the way down Avenue Road when I saw a cab draw up at a house a few doors below us, on the opposite side of the way. A gentleman got out and let himself in at the garden door. I hailed the cab, as the driver mounted the box again. When we crossed the road, my companion's impatience increased to such an extent that she almost forced me to run. "It's so late," she said. "I'm only in a hurry because it's so late." "Can't take you, sir, if you're not going towards Tottenham Court Road," said the driver civilly, when I opened the cab door. "My horse is dead beat. I can't get him to go no further than the stable." Yes, that will do for me. I'm going that way. I'm going that way." She spoke with breathless eagerness, and pressed by me into the cab. I had assured myself that the man was sober as well as civil before I let her enter the vehicle, and now, when she was seated inside, I entreated her to let me see her set down safely at her destination. No, she said vehemently. "I'm quite safe, and I'm quite happy now. If you're a gentleman, remember your promise. Let him drive on till I stop him. Thank you. Oh, thank you, thank you." My hand was on the cab door. She caught it in hers, kissed it, and pushed it away. The cab drove off at the same moment. I started into the road with some vague idea of stopping it again. I hardly knew why. Hesitated from dread of frightening and distressing her. Called at last, but not so loudly as to attract the driver's attention. The sound of the wheels grew fainter in the distance. The cab melted into the black shadows on the road. The woman in white was gone. 10 minutes or more had passed. I was still on the same side of the way, now mechanically walking forward a few paces, now stopping again absently. One moment I found myself doubting the reality of my own adventure. At another I was perplexed and distressed by an uneasy sense of having done wrong, which yet left me confusedly ignorant of how I could have done right. I hardly knew where I was going, or what I meant to do next. I was conscious of nothing but the confusion of my own thoughts, when I was abruptly recalled to myself, awakened, I must almost say, by the sound of rapidly approaching wheels close behind me. I was on the dark side of the road, in the thick shadow of some garden trees, when I stopped to look round. On the opposite and lighter side of the way, a short distance below me, a policeman was strolling along in the direction of Regent's Park. A carriage passed me, an open chaise driven by two men. "Stop!" cried one. "There's a policeman. Let's ask him." The horse was instantly pulled up, a few yards beyond the dark place where I stood. "Policeman," cried the first speaker, "have you seen a woman pass this way?" "What sort of woman, sir?" "A woman in a lavender-coloured gown." "No, no," interposed the second man. "The clothes we gave her were found on her bed. She must have gone away in the clothes she wore when she came to us. In white, policeman. A woman in white." "I haven't seen her, sir." "If you or any of your men meet with the woman, stop her, and send her in careful keeping to that address. I'll pay all expenses, and a fair reward into the bargain." The policeman looked at the card that was handed down to him. "Why are we to stop her, sir? What's she done?" "Done? She's escaped from my asylum. Don't forget, a woman in white. Drive on."
End of track 1. Track 2. The Woman in White. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Woman in White by Wilkie Collins. Read by
Tim Bulkley of BigBible.org.
Track 2.
The First Epoch. 5. She has escaped from my asylum. I cannot say with truth that the terrible inference which those words suggested flashed upon me like a new revelation. Some of the strange questions put to me by the woman in white, after my ill-considered promise to leave her free to act as she pleased, had suggested the conclusion either that she was naturally flighty and unsettled, or that some recent shock of terror had disturbed the balance of her faculties. But the idea of absolute insanity, which we all associate with the very name of an asylum, had, I can honestly declare, never occurred to me in connection with her. I had seen nothing in her language or her actions to justify it at the time, and even with the new light thrown on her by the words which the stranger had addressed to the policeman, I could see nothing to justify it now. What had I done? Assisted the victim of the most horrible of all false imprisonments to escape, or cast loose on the wide world of London an unfortunate creature whose actions it was my duty and every man's duty mercifully to control? I turned, sick at heart, when the question occurred to me, and when I felt self-reproachfully that it was asked too late. In the disturbed state of my mind, it was useless to think of going to bed. When I at last got back to my chambers in Clement's Inn, before many hours elapsed, it would be necessary to start on my journey to Cumberland. I sat down and tried, first to sketch, then to read. But the woman in white got between me and my pencil, between me and my book. Had the forlorn creature come to any harm? That was my first thought, though I shrank selfishly from confronting it. Other thoughts followed, on which it was less harrowing to dwell. Where had she stopped the cab? What had become of her now? Had she been traced and captured by the men in the chaise? Or was she still capable of controlling her own actions, and were we two following our widely parted roads towards one point in the mysterious future, at which we were to meet once more? It was a relief when the hour came to lock my door, to bid farewell to London pursuits, London pupils, and London friends, and to be in movement again towards new interests and a new life. Even the bustle and confusion at the railway terminus, so wearisome and bewildering at other times, roused me and did me good. My travelling instructions directed me to go to Carlisle, and then to diverge by a branch railway which ran in the direction of the coast. As a misfortune to begin with, our engine broke down between Lancaster and Carlisle. The delay occasioned by this accident caused me to be too late for the branch train, by which I was to have gone on immediately. I had to wait some hours, and when a later train finally deposited me at the nearest station to Limmeridge House, it was past 10, and the night was so dark that I could hardly see my way to the pony chaise which Mr. Fairley had ordered to be waiting for me. The driver was evidently discomposed by the lateness of my arrival. He was in that state of highly respectful sulkiness which is peculiar to English servants. We drove away slowly through the darkness in perfect silence. The roads were bad, and the dense obscurity of the night increased the difficulty of getting over the ground quickly. It was, by my watch, nearly an hour and a half from the time of our leaving the station before I heard the sound of the sea in the distance and the crunch of our wheels on a smooth gravel drive. We had passed one gate before entering the drive, and we passed another before we drew up at the house. I was received by a solemn manservant out of livery, was informed that the family had retired for the night, and was then led to a large and lofty room where my supper was awaiting me, in a forlorn manner, at one extremity of a lonesome mahogany wilderness of a dining-table. I was too tired and out of spirits to eat or drink much, especially with the solemn servant waiting on me as elaborately as if a small dinner-party had arrived at the house instead of a solitary man. In a quarter of an hour I was ready to be taken up to my bedchamber. The solemn servant conducted me into a prettily furnished room and said, "Breakfast at 9 o'clock, sir," looked all around him to see that everything was in its proper place, and noiselessly withdrew. What should I see in my dreams to-night? I thought to myself as I put out the candle. The woman in white, or the unknown inhabitants of this Cumberland mansion? It was a strange sensation to be sleeping in the house like a friend of the family, and yet not to know one of the inmates, even by sight. 6. When I arose the next morning and drew my blind, the sea opened before me joyously under the broad August sunlight, and the distant coast of Scotland fringed the horizon with its lines of melting blue. The view was such a surprise and such a change to me after my weary London experience of brick and mortar landscape, that I seemed to burst into a new life and a new set of thoughts the moment I looked at it. A confused sensation of having suddenly lost my familiarity with the past, without acquiring any additional clearness of idea in reference to the present or to the future, took possession of my mind. Circumstances that were but a few days old faded back in my memory as if they had happened months and months since. Pesca's quaint announcement of the means by which he had produced me my present employment, the farewell evening I had passed with my mother and sister, even my mysterious adventure on the way home from Hampstead, all had become like events which might have occurred in some former epoch of my existence. Although the woman in white was still in my mind, the image of her seemed to have grown dull and faint already. A little before 9 o'clock I descended to the ground floor of the house. The solemn manservant of the night before met me wandering along the passages, and compassionately showed me the way to the breakfast-room. My first glance around me, as the man opened the door, disclosed a well-furnished breakfast-table standing in the middle of a long room with many windows in it. I looked from the table to the window furthest from me, and saw a lady standing at it, with her back turned toward me. The instant my eyes rested on her, I was struck by the rare beauty of her form, and by the unaffected grace of her attitude. Her figure was tall, yet not too tall, comely and well developed, yet not fat. Her head set on her shoulders with an easy, pliant firmness. Her waist, perfection in the eyes of a man, for it occupied its natural place. It filled out its natural circle. It was visible and delightfully undeformed by stays. She had not heard my entrance into the room, and I allowed myself the luxury of admiring her for a few moments before I moved one of the chairs near me, as the least embarrassing means of attracting her attention. She turned towards me immediately. The easy elegance of every movement of her limbs and body, as soon as she began to advance from the far end of the room, set me in a flutter of expectation to see her face clearly. She left the window, and I said to myself, The lady is dark. She moved forward a few steps, and I said to myself, the lady is young. She approached nearer, and I said to myself, with a sense of surprise which words fail me to express, the lady is ugly. Never was the old conventional maxim that nature cannot err more flatly contradicted. Never was the fair promise of a lovely figure more strangely and startlingly belied by the face and head that crowned it. The lady's complexion was almost swarthy, and dark down on her upper lip was almost a moustache. She had a large, firm, masculine mouth and jaw, prominent, piercing, resolute brown eyes, and thick, coal-black hair growing unusually low down on her forehead. Her expression, bright, frank, and intelligent, appealed, while she was silent, to be altogether wanting in those feminine attractions of gentleness and pliability, without which the beauty of the handsomest woman alive is beauty incomplete. To see such a face as this, set on shoulders that a sculptor would have longed to model, to be charmed by the modest graces of action through which the symmetrical limbs betrayed their beauty when they moved, and then to be almost repelled by the masculine form and masculine look of the features in which the perfectly shaped figure ended, was to feel a sensation oddly akin to the helpless discomfort familiar to us all in sleep, when we recognize yet cannot reconcile the anomalies and contradictions of a dream. "Mr. Hartright?" said the lady, interrogatively, her dark face lighting up with a smile, and softening and growing womanly the moment she began to speak. "We resigned all hope of you last night, and went to bed as usual. Accept my apologies for our apparent want of attention, and allow me to introduce myself as one of your pupils. Shall we shake hands? I suppose we must come to it sooner or later, and why not sooner?" These odd words of welcome were spoken in a clear, ringing, pleasant voice. The offered hand, rather large but beautifully formed, was given to me with the easy, unaffected self-reliance of a highly bred woman. We sat down together at the breakfast table in as cordial and customary a manner as if we had known each other for years, and had met at Limmeridge House to talk over old times by previous appointment. "I hope you come here good-humouredly determined to make the best of your position," continued the lady. "You will have to begin this morning by putting up with no other company at breakfast than mine. My sister is in her own room, nursing that essentially feminine malady, a slight headache, and her old governess, Mrs. Vasey, is charitably attending on her with restorative tea. My uncle, Mr. Fairley, never joins us at any of our meals. He is an invalid, and keeps bachelor state in his own apartments. There's no one else in the house but me. 2 young ladies have been staying here, but they went away yesterday in despair, and no wonder. All through their visit, in consequence of Mr. Fairley's invalid condition, we produced no such convenience in the house as a flirtable, danceable, small-talkable creature of the male sex, and the consequence was, we did nothing but quarrel, especially at dinner-time. How can you expect 4 women to dine together alone every day and not quarrel? We are such fools. We can't entertain each other at table. You see, I don't think much of my own sex, Mr. Hartright. Which will you have, tea or coffee? No woman does think much of her own sex, though few of them confess it as freely as I do. Dear me, you look puzzled. Why, are you wondering what you will have for breakfast, or are you surprised at my careless way of talking? In the first case, I advise you as a friend to have nothing to do with that cold ham at your elbow, and to wait until the omelette comes in. In the second case, I will give you some tea to compose your spirits, and do all a woman can, which is very little, by the by, to hold my tongue." She handed me my cup of tea, laughing gaily. Her light flow of talk and her lively familiarity of manner with a total stranger were accompanied by an unaffected naturalness and an easy inborn confidence in herself and her position, which would have secured her the respect of the most audacious man breathing. While it was impossible to be formal and reserved in her company, it was more than impossible to take the faintest vestige of a liberty with her, even in thought. I felt this instinctively, even while I caught the infection of her own bright gaiety of spirits, even while I did my best to answer her in her own frank, lively way. "Yes, yes," she said, when I had suggested the only explanation I could offer to account for my perplexed looks. "I understand you're such a perfect stranger in the house that you're puzzled by my familiar references to the worthy inhabitants. Natural enough. I ought to have thought of it before. At any rate, I can set it right now. Suppose I begin with myself, so as to get done with that part of the subject as soon as possible. My name is Marian Halcombe, and I am as inaccurate as women usually are in calling Mr. Fairley my uncle and Miss Fairley my sister. My mother was twice married. The first time to Mr. Halcombe, my father, the second time to Mr. Fairley, my half-sister's father. Except that we're both orphans, we are in every respect as unlike each other as possible. My father was a poor man, and Miss Fairley's father was a rich man. I have got nothing, and she has a fortune. I am dark and ugly, and she is fair and pretty. Everybody thinks me crabbed and odd, with perfect justice, and everybody thinks her sweet-tempered and charming, with more justice still. In short, she is an angel, and I am... Try some of that marmalade, Mr. Hartright, and finish the sentence. In the name of female propriety, for yourself. What am I to tell you about Mr. Fairley? Upon my honour, I hardly know. He is sure to send for you after breakfast, and you can study him for yourself. In the meantime, may I inform you, first, that he is the late Mr. Fairley's younger brother, secondly, that he is a single man, and thirdly, that he is Miss Fairley's guardian. I won't live without her, and she can't live without me, and that is how I come to be at Limmeridge House. My sister and I are honestly fond of each other, which, you will say, is perfectly unaccountable under the circumstances, and I quite agree with you, but so it is. You must please both of us, Mr. Hartright, or please neither of us. And what is still more trying, you will be thrown entirely upon our society. Mrs. Vasey is an excellent person, who possesses all the cardinal virtues, and counts for nothing. Mr. Fairley is too great an invalid to be a companion for anybody. I don't know what is the matter with him, and the doctors don't know what is the matter with him, and he doesn't know himself what is the matter with him. We all say it's on the nerves, and we none of us know what we mean when we say it. However, I advise you to humour his little peculiarities when you see him to-day. Admire his collection of coins, prints, and water-colour drawings, and you will win his heart. Upon my word, if you can be contented with a quiet country life, I don't see why you should not get on very well here. From breakfast to lunch, Mr. Fairley's drawings will occupy you. After lunch, Miss Fairley and I shoulder our sketch-books and go out to misrepresent nature under your directions. Drawing is her favourite whim, mind, not mine. Women can't draw. Their minds are too flighty. Their eyes are too inattentive. No matter, my sister likes it, and so I waste paint and spoil paper for her sake, as composedly as any woman in England. As for the evenings, I think we can help you through them. Miss Fairley plays delightfully. For my own poor part, I don't know one note of music from the other, but I can match you at chess, backgammon, escarte, and with the inevitable female drawbacks, even at billiards as well. What do you think of the programme? Can you reconcile yourself to our quiet, regular life? Or do you mean to be restless and secretly thirst for change and adventure in the humdrum atmosphere of Limmeridge House? She had run on thus far in her graceful, bantering way, with no other interruptions on my part than the unimportant replies which politeness required of me. The turn of the expression, however, in her last question, or rather the one chance word adventure, lightly as it fell from her lips, recalled my thoughts to my meeting with the woman in white, and urged me to discover the connection which the stranger's own reference to Mrs. Fairley informed me must once have existed between the nameless fugitive from the asylum and the former mistress of Limmeridge House. Even if I were the most restless of mankind, I said, I should be in no danger of thirsting after adventures for some time to come. The very night before I arrived at this house, I met with an adventure, and the wonder and excitement of it, I can assure you, Miss Halcombe, will last me for the whole term of my stay in Cumberland, if not for a much longer period. You don't say so, Mr. Hartright. May I hear it? You have a claim to hear it. The chief person in the adventure was a total stranger to me, but may perhaps be a total stranger to you. But she certainly mentioned the name of the late Mrs. Fairley, in terms of the sincerest gratitude and regard. Mentioned my mother's name? You interest me indescribably. Pray go on. I at once related the circumstances under which I had met the woman in white, exactly as they had occurred, and I repeated what she had said to me about Mrs. Fairley and Limmeridge House, word for word. Miss Halcombe's bright, resolute eyes looked eagerly into mine, from the beginning of the narrative to the end. Her face expressed vivid interest and astonishment, but nothing more. She was evidently as far from knowing any clue to the mystery as I was myself. "Are you quite sure of those words referring to my mother?" she asked. "Quite sure," I replied. "Whoever she may be, the woman was once at school in the village of Limmeridge, was treated with especial kindness by Mrs. Fairley, and in grateful remembrance of that kindness feels an affectionate interest in all surviving members of the family. She knew that Mrs. Fairley and her husband were both dead, and spoke of Miss Fairley as if they had known each other when they were children." "You said, I think, that she denied belonging to this place." "Yes, she told me she came from Hampshire." "And you entirely failed to find out her name?" "Entirely." "Very strange. I think you quite justified Mr. Hartright in giving the poor creature her liberty, for she seems to have done nothing in your presence to show herself unfit to enjoy it. But I wish you'd been a little more resolute in finding out her name. We must really clear up this mystery in some way. You'd better not speak of it yet to Mr. Fairley or to my sister. They are both of them, I'm certain, quite as ignorant of who the woman is, or of what her past history in connection with us can be, as I am myself. But they are also, in widely different ways, rather nervous and sensitive, and you'd only fidget one and alarm the other to no purpose. As for myself, I am all aflame with curiosity, and I devote my whole energies to the business of discovery from this moment. When my mother came here after her second marriage, she certainly established the village school just as it exists at the present time. But the old teachers are all dead or gone elsewhere, and no enlightenment is to be hoped for from that quarter. The only other alternative I can think of—" At this point we were interrupted by the entrance of a servant, with a message from Mr. Fairley, intimating that he would be glad to see me as soon as I had done breakfast. "Wait in the hall," said Miss Holcombe, answering the servant for me in her quick, ready way. "Mr. Hartright will come out directly. I was about to say," she went on, addressing me again, "that my sister and I have a large collection of my mother's letters, addressed to my father and to hers. In the absence of any other means of getting information, I'll pass the morning in looking over my mother's correspondence with Mr. Fairley. He was fond of London and was constantly away from his country home, and she was accustomed at such times to write and report to him how things went on at Limmeridge. Her letters are full of references to the school in which she took so strong an interest, and I think it more than likely that I may have discovered something when we meet again. The luncheon hour is 2, Mr. Hartright. I shall have the pleasure of introducing you to my sister at that time, and we will occupy the afternoon in driving round the neighbourhood and showing you all our pet points of view. Till 2 o'clock, then. Farewell." She nodded to me with the lively grace, the delightful refinement of familiarity which characterized all that she did and all that she said, and disappeared by a door at the lower end of the room. As soon as she had left me, I turned my steps towards the hall, followed the servant, on my way for the first time to the presence of Mr. Fairley. 7. My conductor led me upstairs into a passage which took us back to the bedchamber in which I had slept during the past night, and opening the door next to it, begged me to look in. "I have my master's orders to show you your own sitting-room, sir," said the man, "and to inquire if you approve of the situation and the light." I must have been hard to please indeed if I had not approved of the room, and of everything about it. The bow window looked out on the same lovely view which I had admired in the morning from my bedroom. The furniture was the perfection of luxury and beauty. The table in the centre was bright with gaily bound books, elegant conveniences for writing, and beautiful flowers. The second table near the window was covered with all the necessary materials for mounting water-colour drawings, and had a little easel attached to it, which I could expand or fold up at will. The walls were hung with gaily tinted chintz, and the floor was spread with Indian matting in maize colour and red. It was the prettiest and most luxurious little sitting-room I had ever seen, and I admired it with the warmest enthusiasm. The servant was far too highly trained to betray the slightest satisfaction. He bowed with icy deference when my terms of eulogy were all exhausted, and silently opened the door for me to go out into the passage again. We turned a corner and entered the long second passage, ascended a short flight of stairs at the end, crossed a small circular upper hall, and stopped in front of a door covered with dark baize. The servant opened this door and led me a few yards to a second, opened that also, and disclosed two curtains of pale sea-green silk hanging before us, raised one of them noiselessly, softly uttered the words, "Mr. Hartright," and left me. I found myself in a large, lofty room with a magnificent carved ceiling, and with carpet all over the floor, so thick and soft that it felt like piles of velvet under my feet. One side of the room was occupied by a long bookcase of some rare inlaid wood that was quite new to me. It was not more than 6 feet high, and the top was adorned with statuettes in marble, ranged at regular distances one from the other. On the opposite side stood two antique cabinets, and between them and above them hung a picture of the Virgin and Child, protected by glass and bearing Raphael's name on the gilt tablet at the bottom of the frame. On my right hand and on my left, as I stood inside the door, were chiffonières and little stands in buhl and marqueterie, loaded with figures in Dresden china, with rare vases, ivory ornaments, and toys and curiosities that sparkled at all points with gold, silver, and precious stones. At the lower end of the room opposite to me, the windows were concealed, and the sunlight was tempered by large blinds of the same pale sea-green colour as the curtains over the door. The light thus produced was deliciously soft, mysterious, and subdued. It fell equally upon all the objects in the room, and it helped to intensify the deep silence and the air of profound seclusion that possessed the place. And it surrounded with an appropriate halo of repose the solitary figure of the master of the house, leaning back, listlessly composed, in a large easy chair with a reading easel fastened on one of its arms, and a little table on the other. If a man's personal appearance, when he is out of his dressing-room, and when he has passed 40, can be accepted as a safe guide to his time of life, which is more than doubtful, Mr. Fairley's age when I saw him might have reasonably been computed as over 50 and under 60 years. His beardless face was thin, worn, and transparently pale, but not wrinkled. His nose was high and hooked. His eyes were of a dim greyish blue, large, prominent, and rather red around the rims of the eyelids. His hair was scanty, soft to look at, and of that light sandy colour which is the last to disclose its own changes towards grey. He was dressed in a dark frock-coat of some substance much thinner than cloth, and in waistcoat and trousers of spotless white. His feet were effeminately small, and were clad in buff-coloured silk stockings, and little womanish bronze leather slippers. 2 rings adorned his white, delicate hands, the value of which even my inexperienced observation detected to be all but priceless. Upon the whole, he had a frail, languidly fretful, over-refined look, something singularly and unpleasantly delicate in its association with a man, and at the same time something which could by no possibility have looked natural and appropriate if it had been transferred to the personal appearance of a woman. My morning's experience with Miss Halcombe had predisposed me to be pleased with everybody in the house, but my sympathies shut themselves up resolutely at the first sight of Mr. Fairley. On approaching nearer to him, I discovered that he was not so entirely without occupation as I had first supposed. Placed amid the other rare and beautiful objects on a large round table near him was a dwarf cabinet in ebony and silver, containing coins of all shapes and sizes, set out in little drawers lined with dark purple velvet. One of these drawers lay on the small table attached to his chair, and near it were some tiny jeweller's brushes, a wash-leather stump, and a little bottle of liquid, all waiting to be used in various ways for the removal of any accidental impurities which might be discovered on the coins. His frail white fingers were listlessly toying with something which looked, to my uninstructed eyes, like a dirty pewter medal with ragged edges, when I advanced within a respectful distance of his chair and stopped to make my bow. "So glad to possess you at Limmeridge, Mr. Hartright," he said in a querulous, croaking voice, which combined in anything but an agreeable manner a discordantly high tone with a drowsily languid utterance. "Pray sit down, and don't trouble yourself to move the chair, please. In the wretched state of my nerves, movement of any kind is exquisitely painful to me. Have you seen your studio? Will it do?" "I've just come from seeing the room, Mr. Fairley, and I assure you—" He stopped me in the middle of my sentence by closing his eyes and holding up one of his white hands imploringly. I paused in astonishment, and the croaking voice honoured me with this explanation. "Pray excuse me, and could you contrive to speak in a lower key? In the wretched state of my nerves, loud sound of any kind is indescribable torture to me. You will pardon an invalid. I only say to you that the lamentable state of my health obliges me to say to everybody, yes. And you really like the room?" "I could wish for nothing prettier and nothing more comfortable," I answered, dropping my voice and beginning to discover already that Mr. Fairley's selfish affectation and Mr. Fairley's wretched nerves meant one and the same thing. "So glad. You will find your position here, Mr. Hartright, properly recognized. There is none of the horrid English barbarity of feeling about the social position of an artist in this house. So much of my early life has been passed abroad that I have quite cast my insular skin in that respect. I wish I could say the same of the gentry, detestable word, but I suppose I must use it, of the gentry in the neighbourhood. They are sad Goths in art, Mr. Hartright, people, I do assure you, who would have opened their eyes in astonishment if they had seen Charles V pick up Titian's brush for him. Do you mind putting this tray of coins back in the cabinet and giving me the next one to it? In the wretched state of my nerves, exertion of any kind is unspeakably disagreeable to me. Yes, thank you." As a practical commentary on the liberal social theory which he had just favoured me by illustrating, Mr. Fairley's cool request rather amused me. I put back one drawer and gave him the other, with all possible politeness. He began trifling with the new set of coins and the little brushes immediately, languidly looking at them and admiring them all the time he was speaking to me. "A thousand thanks and a thousand excuses. Do you like coins?" "Yes. So glad we have another taste in common besides our taste for art. Now, about the pecuniary arrangements between us. Do tell me, are they satisfactory?" "Most satisfactory, Mr. Fairley." "So glad. And what next? Ah, I remember. Yes. In reference to the consideration which you are good enough to accept for giving me the benefit of your accomplishment in art, my steward will wait on you at the end of the first week to ascertain your wishes. And what next? Curious, is it not? I had a great deal more to say, and I appear to have quite forgotten it. Do you mind touching the bell in that corner? Yes. Thank you." I rang, and a new servant noiselessly made his appearance, a foreigner, with a set smile and perfectly brushed hair, a valet every inch of him. "Louis," said Mr. Fairley, dreamily dusting the tips of his fingers with one of the tiny brushes for the coins, "I made some entries in my tablette this morning. Find my tablette? 1,000 pardons, Mr. Hartright, I'm afraid to bore you." As he wearily closed his eyes again before I could answer, and as he did most assuredly bore me, I sat silent and looked up at the Madonna and Child by Raphael. In the meantime, the valet left the room and returned shortly with a little ivory book. Mr. Fairley, after first relieving himself by a gentle sigh, let the book drop open with one hand, and held up the tiny brush with the other, as a sign to the servant to wait for further orders. "Yes, just so," said Mr. Fairley, consulting the tablette. "Louis, take down that portfolio." He pointed as he spoke to several portfolios placed near the window on mahogany stands. No, not the one with the green back. That contains my Rembrandt etchings, Mr. Hartright. Do you like etchings?" "Yes." "So glad we have another taste in common. The portfolio with the red back, Louis. Don't drop it. You have no idea of the tortures I should suffer, Mr. Hartright, if Louis dropped that portfolio. Is it safe on the chair? Do you think it safe, Mr. Hartright? Yes? So glad. Will you oblige me by looking at the drawings, if you really think they're quite safe? Louis, go away. What an ass you are. Don't you see me holding the tablette? Do you suppose I want to hold them? Then why not relieve me of the tablette without being told? A thousand pardons, Mr. Hartright. Servants are such asses, are they not? Do tell me, what do you think of the drawings? They have come from a sale in a shocking state. I thought they smelt of horrid dealers and brokers' fingers when I opened them last. Can you undertake them? Although my nerves were not delicate enough to detect the odour of plebeian fingers which had offended Mr. Fairley's nostrils, my taste was sufficiently educated to enable me to appreciate the value of the drawings while I turned them over. They were, for the most part, really fine specimens of English water-colour art, and they had deserved much better treatment at the hands of their former possessor than they appeared to have received. The drawings, I answered, require careful straining and mounting, and in my opinion they are well worth— I beg your pardon, interposed Mr. Fairley. Do you mind my closing my eyes while you speak? Even this light is too much for them. Yes? I was about to say that the drawings are well worth all the time and trouble. Mr. Fairley suddenly opened his eyes again, rolled them with an expression of helpless alarm in the direction of the window. I entreat you to excuse me, Mr. Hartright, he said in a feeble flutter, but surely I heard some horrid children in the garden. My private garden below? I can't say, Mr. Fairley. I heard nothing myself. Oblige me. You have been so very good in honouring my poor nerves. Oblige me by lifting the corner of the blind. Don't let the sun in on me, Mr. Hartright. Have you got the blind up? Yes. Then will you be so very kind as to look into the garden and make quite sure? I complied with this new request. The garden was carefully walled in all around. Not a human creature, large or small, appeared in any part of the sacred seclusion. I reported that gratifying fact to Mr. Fairley. A thousand thanks. My fancy, I suppose. There are no children, thank heaven, in the house, but the servants, persons born without nerves, will encourage the children from the village. Such brats! Oh, dear me, such brats! Shall I confess it, Mr. Hartright? I sadly want a reform in the construction of children. Nature's only idea seems to be to make them machines for the production of incessant noise. Surely our delightful Raffaello's conception is infinitely preferable. He pointed to the picture of the Madonna, the upper part of which represented the conventional cherubs of Italian art, celestially provided with sitting accommodation for their chins on balloons of buff-coloured cloud. Quite a model family, said Mr. Fairley, leering at the cherubs. Such nice round faces, such nice soft wings, and nothing else. No dirty little legs to run about on, no noisy little lungs to scream with. How immeasurably superior to the existing construction. I will close my eyes again, if you will allow me. And you really can manage the drawings? So glad. Is there anything else to settle? If there is, I think I have forgotten it. Shall we ring for Louis again? Being by this time quite as anxious on my side as Mr. Fairley evidently was on his to bring the interview to a speedy conclusion, I thought that I would try to render the summoning of the servant unnecessary by offering the requisite suggestion of my own responsibility. The only point, Mr. Fairley, that remains to be discussed, I said, refers, I think, to the instruction in sketching which I am engaged to communicate to the two young ladies. Ah, just so. I wish I had felt strong enough to go into that part of the arrangement, but I don't. The ladies who profit by your kind services, Mr. Hartright, must settle and decide and so on for themselves. My niece is fond of your charming art. She knows just enough about it to be conscious of her own sad defects. Please take pains with her. Yes? Is there anything else? No? We quite understand each other, don't we? I have no right to detain you any longer from your delightful pursuit, have I? So pleasant to have settled everything. Just a sensible relief to have done business. Do you mind ringing for Louis to carry the portfolio to your own room? I'll carry it there myself, Mr. Fairley, if you'll allow me. Will you really? Are you strong enough? How nice to be so strong. Are you sure you won't drop it? So glad to possess you at Limmeridge, Mr. Hartright. I'm such a sufferer that I hardly dare hope to enjoy much of your society. Would you mind taking great pains not to let the doors bang? And do not drop the portfolio. Thank you. Gently with the curtains, please. The slightest noise from them goes through me like a knife. Yes. Good morning. When the sea-green curtains were closed, and when the two baize doors were shut behind me, I stopped for a moment in the little circular hall beyond, and drew a long, luxurious breath of relief. It was like coming to the surface of the water after deep diving, to find myself once more on the outside of Mr. Fairlie's room. As soon as I was comfortably established for the morning in my pretty little studio, the first resolution at which I arrived was to turn my steps no more in the direction of the apartments occupied by the master of the house, except in the very improbable event of his honouring me with a special invitation to pay him another visit. Having settled this satisfactory plan of future conduct in reference to Mr. Fairlie, I soon recovered the serenity of temper of which my employer's haughty familiarity and impudent politeness had for the moment deprived me. The remaining hours of the morning passed away pleasantly enough, in looking over the drawings, arranging them in sets, trimming their ragged edges, and accomplishing the other necessary preparations in anticipation of the business of mounting them. I ought, perhaps, to have made more progress than this, but as the luncheon time drew near, I grew restless and unsettled, and felt unable to fix my attention on work, even though that work was only of the humble manual kind. At 2 o'clock I descended again to the breakfast-room, a little anxiously. Expectations of some interest were connected with my approaching reappearance in that part of the house. My introduction to Miss Fairlie was now close at hand, and if Miss Halcombe's search through her mother's letters had produced the result which she anticipated, the time had come for clearing up the mystery of the woman in white.
End of Track 2. Track 3. The Woman in White. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Woman in White by Wilkie Collins. Read by
Tim Bulkley of BigBible.org.
Track 3.
The First Epoch. 8. When I entered the room, I found Miss Halcombe and an elderly lady seated at the luncheon table. The elderly lady, when I was presented to her, proved to be Miss Fairlie's former governess, Mrs. Vasey, who had been briefly described to me by my lively companion at the breakfast table as possessed of all the cardinal virtues and counting for nothing. I can do little more than offer my humble testimony to the truthfulness of Miss Halcombe's sketch of the old lady's character. Mrs. Vasey looked the personification of human composure and female amiability. A calm enjoyment of a calm existence beamed in drowsy smiles on her plump, placid face. Some of us rush through life, and some of us saunter through life. Mrs. Vasey sat through life. Sat in the house early and late, sat in the garden, sat in unexpected window-seats in passages, sat on a camp stool when her friends tried to take her out walking, sat before she looked at anything, before she talked of anything, before she answered yes or no to the commonest question, always with the same serene smile on her lips, the same vacantly attentive turn of the head, the same snugly comfortable position of her hands and arms, under every possible change of domestic circumstances, a mild, a compliant, an unutterably tranquil and harmless old lady, who never by any chance suggested the idea that she had been actually active since the hour of her birth. Nature has much to do in this world, and is engaged in generating such a vast variety of coexistent productions that she must surely be now and then too flurried and confused to distinguish between the different processes that she is carrying on at the same time. Starting from this point of view, it will always remain my private persuasion that Nature was absorbed in making cabbages when Mrs. Vasey was born, and that the good lady suffered the consequences of a vegetable preoccupation in the mind of the mother of us all. "Now, Mrs. Vasey," said Miss Halcombe, looking brighter, sharper, and readier than ever, by contrast with the undemonstrative old lady at her side. "What will you have? A cutlet?" Mrs. Vasey crossed her dimpled hands on the edge of the table, smiled placidly, and said, "Yes, dear." "What is that opposite Mr. Hartright? Boiled chicken, is it not? I thought you liked boiled chicken better than cutlet, Mrs. Vasey." Mrs. Vasey took her dimpled hands off the edge of the table and crossed them on her lap instead, nodded contemplatively at the boiled chicken, and said, "Yes, dear." "Well, But which will you have to-day? Shall Mr. Hartright give you some chicken, or shall I give you some cutlet?" Mrs. Vasey put one of her dimpled hands back again on the edge of the table, hesitated drowsily, and said, "Which you please, dear." "Mercy me, it's a question of your taste, my good lady, not for mine. Suppose you have a little of both. Suppose you begin with the chicken, because Mr. Hartright looks devoured by anxiety to carve for you." Mrs. Vasey put the other dimpled hand back on the edge of the table, brightened dimly one moment, went out again the next, bowed obediently, and said, "If you please, sir." Surely a mild, compliant, and unutterably tranquil and harmless old lady, but enough, perhaps, for the present, of Mrs. Vasey. All this time there were no signs of Miss Fairlie. We finished our luncheon, and still she never appeared. Miss Halcombe, whose quick eye nothing escaped, noticed the looks that I cast from time to time in the direction of the door. "I understand you, Mr. Hartright," she said. "You're wondering what's become of your other pupil. She's been downstairs and has got over her headache, but has not sufficiently recovered her appetite to join us at lunch. If you'll put yourself under my charge, I think I can undertake to find her somewhere in the garden." She took up a parasol lying on a chair near me, and led the way out by a long window at the bottom of the room, which opened on the lawn. It's almost unnecessary to say that we left Mrs. Vasey still seated at the table, with her dimpled hands still crossed on the edge of it, apparently settled in that position for the rest of the afternoon. As we crossed the lawn, Miss Halcombe looked at me significantly and shook her head. "That mysterious adventure of yours," she said, "still remains involved in its own appropriate midnight darkness. I've been all morning looking over my mother's letters, and have made no discoveries yet. However, don't despair, Mr. Hartright. This is a matter of curiosity, and you have got a woman for your ally. Under such conditions success is certain sooner or later. The letters are not exhausted. I have 3 packets still left, and you may confidently rely on my spending the whole evening over them." Here, then, was one of my anticipations of the morning still unfulfilled. I began to wonder next whether my introduction to Miss Fairlie would disappoint the expectations that I had been forming of her since breakfast time. "And how did you get on with Mr. Fairlie?" inquired Miss Halcombe, as we left the lawn and turned into a shrubbery. "Was he particularly nervous this morning? Never mind considering about your answer, Mr. Hartright. The mere fact of your being obliged to consider is enough for me. I see in your face that he was particularly nervous, and I am amiably unwilling to throw you into the same condition. I ask no more." We turned off into a winding path while she was speaking, and approached a pretty summer house built of wood in the form of a miniature Swiss chalet. The one room of the summer house, as we ascended the steps to the door, was occupied by a young lady. She was standing near a rustic table, looking out at the inland view of moor and hill presented by a gap in the trees, and absently turning over the leaves of a little sketch-book that lay at her side. This was Miss Fairlie. How can I describe her? How can I separate her from my own sensations, and from all that has happened in the later time? How can I see her again as she looked when my eyes first rested on her, as she should look now to the eyes that are about to see her in these pages? The water-colour drawing that I made of Laura Fairlie at an after period, in the place and the attitude in which I first saw her, lies on my desk as I write. I look at it, and there dawns upon me brightly, from the dark greenish-brown background of the summer-house, a light, youthful figure, clothed in a simple muslin dress, the pattern of it formed by broad alternate stripes of delicate blue and white. A scarf of the same material sits crisply and closely round her shoulders, and a little straw hat of a natural colour, plainly and sparingly trimmed with ribbon to match the gown, covers her head, and throws its soft pearly shadow over the upper part of her face. Her hair is of so faint and pale a brown, not flaxen, and yet almost as light, not golden, and yet almost as glossy, that it nearly melts here and there into the shadow of the hat. It is plainly parted and then drawn back over her ears, and the line of it ripples naturally as it crosses her forehead. The eyebrows are rather darker than the hair, and the eyes are of that soft, limpid turquoise blue so often sung by poets, and so seldom seen in real life. Lovely eyes in colour, lovely eyes in form, large and tender and quietly thoughtful, but beautiful above all things in the clear truthfulness of the look that dwells in their inmost depths and shines through all their changes of expression with the light of a purer and a better world. The charm, most gently and yet most distinctly expressed, which they shed over the whole face, so covers and transforms its little natural human blemishes elsewhere that it is difficult to estimate the relative merits and defects of the other features. It's hard to see that the lower part of the face is too delicately refined away towards the chin to be in full and fair proportion with the upper part, that the nose, in escaping the aquiline bend, always hard and cruel in a woman, no matter how abstractedly perfect it may be, has erred a little in the other extreme, and has missed the ideal straightness of line, and that the sweet, sensitive lips are subject to a slight nervous contraction when she smiles, which draws them upwards a little at one corner towards the cheek. It might be possible to note these blemishes in another woman's face, but it is not easy to dwell on them in hers, so subtly are they connected with all that is individual and characteristic in her expression, and so closely does the expression depend for its full play and life with every other feature on the moving impulse of the eyes. Does my poor portrait of her, my fond, patient labour of long and happy days, show me these things? Ah, how few of them there are in the dim mechanical drawing, and how many in the mind with which I regard it. A fair, delicate girl, in a pretty light dress, trifling with the leaves of a sketch-book, while she looks up from it with truthful, innocent blue eyes. That's all the drawing can say. All, perhaps, that even the deeper reach of thought and pen can say in their language either. The woman who first gives life, light, and form to our shadowy conceptions of beauty fill a void in our spiritual nature that has remained unknown to us till she appeared. Sympathies that lie too deep for words, too deep almost for thoughts, are touched at such times by other charms than those which the senses feel, and which the resource of expression can realize. The mystery which underlies the beauty of a woman is never raised above the reach of all expression until it has claimed kindred with the deeper mystery of our own souls. Then, and then only, has it passed beyond the narrow region on which light falls in this world, from the pencil and the pen. Think of her as you thought of the first woman who quickened the pulses within you that the rest of her sex had no art to stir. Let the kind, candid blue eyes meet yours, as they met mine, with the matchless look which we both remember so well. Let her voice speak the music that you once loved best, attuned as sweetly to your ear as to mine. Let her footstep as she comes and goes in these pages be like that other footstep to whose airy fall your own heart once beat time. Take her as the visionary nursling of your own fancy, and she will grow upon you all the more clearly as the living woman who dwells in mine. Among the sensations that crowded on me when my eyes first looked upon her, familiar sensations which we all know, which spring to life in most of our hearts, die away again in so many, and renew their bright existence in so few, there was one that troubled and perplexed me, one that seemed strangely inconsistent and unaccountably out of place in Miss Fairley's presence. Mingling with the vivid impression produced by the charm of her fair face and head, her sweet expression, and her winning simplicity of manner, was another impression, which, in a shadowy way, suggested to me the idea of something wanting. At one time it seemed like something wanting in her, at another like something wanting in myself, which hindered me from understanding her as I ought. The impression was always strongest in the most contradictory manner when she looked at me, or, in other words, when I was most conscious of the harmony and charm of her face, and yet at the same time most troubled by the sense of incompleteness which it was impossible to discover. Something wanting, and where it was and what it was I could not say. The effect of this curious caprice of fancy, as I thought it then, was not of a nature to set me at my ease during the first interview with Miss Fairley. The few kind words of welcome which she spoke found me hardly self-possessed enough to thank her in the customary phrases of reply. Observing my hesitation, and no doubt attributing it, naturally enough, to some momentary shyness on my part, Miss Halcombe took the business of talking, as easily and readily as usual, into her own hands. "Look there, Mr. Hartright," she said, pointing to the sketch-book on the table, and to the little delicate wandering hand that was still trifling with it. "Surely you will acknowledge that your model pupil is found at last. The moment she hears that you are in the house, she seizes her inestimable sketch-book, looks universal nature straight in the face, and longs to begin." Miss Fairley laughed with a ready good humour, which broke out as brightly as if it had been part of the sunshine above us over her lovely face. "I must not take credit to myself where no credit is due," she said, her clear, truthful blue eyes looking alternately at Miss Halcombe and me. "Fond as I am of drawing, I was so conscious of my own ignorance that I am more afraid than anxious to begin. Now that you're here, Mr. Hartright, I find myself looking over my sketches as I used to look over my lessons when I was a little girl, when I was sadly afraid that I should turn out not fit to be heard." She made the confession very prettily and simply, and with quaint childish earnestness drew the sketch-book away close to her own side of the table. Miss Halcombe cut the knot of the little embarrassment forthwith in her resolute, downright way. "Good, bad, or indifferent," she said, "the pupil's sketches must pass through the fiery ordeal of the master's judgment, and there's an end of it. Suppose we take them with us in the carriage, Laura, and let Mr. Hartright see them for the first time under circumstances of perpetual jolting and interruption. If we can only confuse him all through the drive between nature as it is when he looks up at the view and nature as it is not when he looks down again at our sketch-books, we shall drive him into the last desperate refuge of paying us compliments, and shall slip through his professional fingers with our pet feathers of vanity all unruffled." "I hope Mr. Hartright will pay me no compliments," said Miss Fairley, as we all left the summer-house. "May I venture to inquire why you express that hope?" I asked. "Because I shall believe all that you say to me," she answered simply. In those few words she unconsciously gave me the key to her whole character, to that generous trust in others which, in her nature, grew innocently out of the sense of her own truth. I only knew it intuitively then. I know it by experience now. We merely waited to rouse good Miss Vasey from the place which she still occupied at the deserted luncheon-table before we entered the open carriage for our promised drive. The old lady and Miss Halcombe occupied the back seat. Miss Fairley and I sat together in front, with the sketch-book open between us, fairly exhibited at last to my professional eyes. All serious criticism of the drawings, even if I had been disposed to volunteer it, was rendered impossible by Miss Halcombe's lively resolution to see nothing but the ridiculous side of the fine arts, as practised by herself, her sister, and ladies in general. I can remember the conversation that passed far more easily than the sketches that I mechanically looked over. That part of the talk especially, in which Miss Fairley took any share, is still as vividly impressed on my memory as if I had heard it only a few hours ago. Yes, let me acknowledge that this first day I let the charm of her presence lure me from the recollection of myself and my position. The most trifling of the questions that she put to me on the subject of using her pencil and mixing her colours, the slightest alterations of expression in the lovely eyes that looked into mine with such earnest desire to learn all that I could teach, and to discover all that I could show, attracted more of my attention than the finest view we passed through, or the grandest changes of light and shade as they flowed into each other over the waving moorland and level beach. At any time and under any circumstances of human interest, is it not strange to see how little real hold the objects of the natural world amid which we live can gain on our hearts and minds? We go to nature for comfort in trouble, and sympathy and joy only in books. Admiration of those beauties of the inanimate world which modern poetry so largely and so eloquently describes is not, even in the best of us, one of the original instincts of our nature. As children we none of us possess it. No uninstructed man or woman possesses it. Those whose lives are most exclusively passed amid the ever-changing wonders of sea and land are also those who are most universally insensible to every aspect of nature not directly associated with the human interest of their calling. Our capacity of appreciating the beauties of the earth we live on is, in truth, one of the civilized accomplishments which we all learn as an art. And more, that very capacity is rarely practised by any of us, except when our minds are most indolent and most unoccupied. How much share have the attractions of nature ever had in the pleasurable or painful interests and emotions of ourselves or our friends? What space do they ever occupy in the thousand little narratives of personal experience which pass every day by word of mouth from one of us to the other? All that our minds can compass, all that our hearts can learn, can be accomplished with equal certainty, equal profit, and equal satisfaction to ourselves in the poorest as in the richest prospect that the face of the earth can show. There is surely a reason for this want of inborn sympathy between the creature and the creation around it, a reason which may perhaps be found in the widely differing destinies of man and his earthly sphere. The grandest mountain prospect that the eye can range over is appointed to annihilation. The smallest human interest that the human heart can feel is appointed to immortality. We had been out nearly 3 hours when the carriage again passed through the gates of Limmeridge House. On our way back, I had let the ladies settle for themselves the first point of view which they were to sketch, under my instructions, on the afternoon of the next day. When they withdrew to dress for dinner, and when I was alone again in my little sitting-room, my spirits seemed to leave me all of a sudden. I felt ill at ease and dissatisfied with myself. I hardly knew why. Perhaps I was now conscious for the first time of having enjoyed our drive too much in the character of a guest, and too little in the character of a drawing-master. Perhaps that strange sense of something wanting, either in Miss Fairlie or in myself, which had perplexed me when I first was introduced to her, haunted me still. Anyhow, it was a relief to my spirits when the dinner hour called me out of my solitude and took me back to the society of the ladies of the house. I was struck on entering the drawing-room by the curious contrast, rather in material than in colour, of the dresses which they now wore. While Mrs. Vesey and Miss Halcombe were richly clad, each in the manner most becoming to her age, the first in silver grey, and the second in that delicate primrose yellow colour which matches so well with the dark complexion and black hair. Miss Fairlie was unpretendingly and almost poorly dressed in plain white muslin. It was spotlessly pure. It was beautifully put on, but still it was the sort of dress which the wife or daughter of a poor man might have worn, and it made her, so far as externals went, look less affluent in circumstances than her own governess. At a later period, when I learnt to know more of Miss Fairlie's character, I discovered that this curious contrast on the wrong side was due to her natural delicacy of feeling and natural intensity of aversion to the slightest personal display of her own wealth. Neither Mrs. Vesey nor Miss Halcombe could ever induce her to let the advantage in dress desert the two ladies who were poor, to lean to the side of the one lady who was rich. When the dinner was over, we returned together to the drawing-room. Although Mr. Fairlie, emulating the magnificent condescension of the monarch who had picked up Titian's brush for him, and instructed his butler to consult my wishes in relation to the wine which I might prefer after dinner, I was resolute enough to resist the temptation of sitting in solitary grandeur among bottles of my own choosing, and sensible enough to ask the ladies' permission to leave the table with them habitually, on the civilized foreign plan, during the period of my residence at Limmeridge House. The drawing-room, to which we had now withdrawn for the rest of the evening, was on the ground floor, and was of the same shape and size as the breakfast-room. Large glass doors at the lower end opened on to the terrace, beautifully ornamented along its whole length with a profusion of flowers. The soft, hazy twilight was just shading leaf and blossom alike into harmony with its own sombre hues as we entered the room, and the sweet evening scent of the flowers met us with its fragrant welcome through the open glass doors. Good Mrs. Vesey, always the first of the party to sit down, took possession of an arm-chair in the corner, and dozed off comfortably to sleep. At my request, Miss Fairley placed herself at the piano. As I followed her to a seat near the instrument, I saw Miss Holcombe retire into a recess of one of the side windows, to proceed with a search through her mother's letters by the last rays of the evening light. How vividly that peaceful home picture of the drawing-room comes back to me while I write! From the place where I sat, I could see Miss Holcombe's graceful figure, half of it in soft light, half in mysterious shadow, bending intently over the letters in her lap, while nearer to me the fair profile of the player at the piano was just delicately defined against the faintly deepening background of the inner wall of the room. Outside on the terrace, the clustering flowers and long grasses and creepers waved so gently in the light evening air that the sound of their rustling never reached us. The sky was without a cloud, and the dawning mystery of moonlight began to tremble already in the region of the eastern heaven. The sense of peace and seclusion soothed all thought and feeling into a rapt, unearthly repose. The balmy quiet, that deepened ever with the deepening light, seemed to hover over us in a gentler influence still, when there stole upon it from the piano the heavenly tenderness of the music of Mozart. It was an evening of sights and sounds never to forget. We all sat silent in the places we had chosen, Mrs. Vasey still sleeping, Miss Fairley still playing, Miss Holcombe still reading, till the light failed us. By this time the moon had stolen round to the terrace, and soft, mysterious rays of light were slanting already across the lower end of the room. The change from the twilight obscurity was so beautiful that we banished the lamps by common consent when the servant brought them in, and kept the large room unlighted, except by the glimmer of the 2 candles at the piano. For half an hour more the music still went on. After that the beauty of the moonlight view on the terrace tempted Miss Fairley out to look at it, and I followed her. When the candles at the piano had been lighted, Miss Holcombe had changed her place so as to continue her examination of the letters with their assistance. We left her on a low chair at one side of the instrument, so absorbed over her reading that she did not seem to notice when we moved. We had been out on the terrace together, just in front of the glass doors, hardly so long as 5 minutes, I should think, and Miss Fairley was, by my advice, just tying her white handkerchief over her head as a precaution against the night air, when I heard Miss Holcombe's voice, low, eager, and altered from its natural lively tone, pronounce my name. "Mr. Hartright," she said, "will you come here for a minute? I want to speak to you." I entered the room immediately. The piano stood about halfway down along the inner wall. On the side of the instrument furthest from the terrace, Miss Holcombe was sitting with the letters scattered on her lap, and with one hand she selected from them and held close to the candle. On the side nearest to the terrace there stood a low ottoman, on which I took my place. In this position I was not far from the glass doors, and I could see Miss Fairley plainly, as she passed and repassed the opening on the terrace, walking slowly from end to end of it in the full radiance of the moon. I want you to listen while I read the concluding passages in this letter," said Miss Holcombe. "Tell me if you think they throw any light upon your strange adventure on the road to London. The letter is addressed by my mother to her second husband, Mr. Fairley, and the date refers to a period between 11 and 12 years since. At that time Mr. and Mrs. Fairley and my half-sister Laura had been living for years in this house. I was away from them, completing my education at a school in Paris." She looked and spoke earnestly, and, as I thought, a little uneasily as well. At the moment when she raised the letter to the candle before beginning to read it, Miss Fairley passed us on the terrace, looked in for a moment, and seeing that we were engaged, slowly walked on. Miss Holcombe began to read as follows: "You will be tired, my dear Philip, of hearing perpetually about my schools and my scholars. Lay the blame, pray, on the dull uniformity of life at Limmeridge, and not on me. Besides, this time I have something really interesting to tell you about a new scholar. You know old Mrs. Kemp at the village shop? Well, after years of ailing, the doctor has at last given her up, and she's dying slowly, day by day. Her only living relation, a sister, arrived last week to take care of her. This sister comes all the way from Hampshire. Her name is Mrs. Catherick. 4 days ago, Mrs. Catherick came here to see me, and brought her only child with her, a sweet little girl about a year older than our darling Laura." As the last sentence fell from the reader's lips, Miss Fairley passed us on the terrace once more. She was softly singing to herself one of the melodies which she had been playing earlier in the evening. Miss Halcombe waited until she had passed out of sight again, and then went on with the letter. "Mrs. Catherick is a decent, well-behaved, respectable woman, middle-aged, and with the remains of having been only moderately, nice-looking. There is something in her manner and her appearance, however, which I can't make out. She is reserved about herself to the point of downright secrecy, and there is a look in her face, I can't describe it, which suggests to me that she has something on her mind. She is altogether what you would call a walking mystery. Her errand at Limmeridge House, however, was simple enough. When she left Hampshire to nurse her sister, Mrs. Kemp, through her last illness, she had been obliged to bring her daughter with her, through having no one at home to take care of the little girl. Mrs. Kemp may die in a week's time, or may linger on for months, and Mrs. Catherick's object was to ask me to let her daughter, Anne, have the benefit of attending my school, subject to the condition of her being removed from it to go home again with her mother after Mrs. Kemp's death. I consented at once, and when Laura and I went out for our walk, we took the little girl, who is just 11 years old, to the school that very day." Once more Miss Fairley's figure, bright and soft in its snowy muslin dress, her face prettily framed by the white folds of the handkerchief which she had tied under her chin, passed by us in the moonlight. Once more Miss Halcombe waited till she was out of sight, and then went on. "I have taken a violent fancy, Philip, to my new scholar, for a reason which I mean to keep to the last for the sake of surprising you. Her mother having told me as little about the child as she told me about herself, I was left to discover, which I did on the very first day when we tried her at lessons, that the poor little thing's intellect is not developed as it ought to be at her age. Seeing this, I had her up at the house the next day, and privately arranged with the doctor to come and watch her and question her, and tell me what he thought. His opinion is that she will grow out of it, but he says her careful bringing up at school is a matter of great importance just now, because her unusual slowness in acquiring ideas implies an unusual tenacity in keeping them when they are once received into her mind. Now, my love, you must not imagine in your off-hand way that I have been attaching myself to an idiot. This poor little Anne Catherick is a sweet, affectionate, grateful girl, and says the quaintest, prettiest things, as you shall judge by an instance, in the most oddly sudden, surprised, half-frightened way. Although she is dressed very neatly, her clothes show a sad want of taste in colour and pattern. So I arranged yesterday that some of our darling Laura's old white frocks and white hats should be altered for Anne Catherick, explaining to her that little girls of her complexion look neater and prettier all in white than in anything else. She hesitated and seemed puzzled for a minute, then flushed up and appeared to understand. Her little hand clasped mine suddenly. She kissed it, Philip, and said, oh, so earnestly, "I will always wear white as long as I live. It will help me to remember you, ma'am, and to think that I am pleasing you still, when I go away and see you no more." This is only one specimen of the quaint things she says so prettily. Poor little soul! She shall have a stock of white frocks, made with good deep tucks, to let out for her as she grows. Miss Halcombe paused and looked at me across the piano. "Did the forlorn woman whom you met on the high road seem young?" she asked. "Young enough to be 2 or 23?" "Yes, Miss Halcombe, as young as that." "And she was strangely dressed from head to foot, all in white?" "All in white." While the answer was passing my lips, Miss Fairley glided into view on the terrace for the third time. Instead of proceeding on her walk, she stopped, with her back turned towards us, and, leaning on the balustrade of the terrace, looked down into the garden beyond, my eyes fixed on the white gleam of her muslin gown and head-dress in the moonlight, and a sensation, for which I can find no name, A sensation that quickened my pulse and raised a fluttering in my heart began to steal over me. "All in white," Miss Halcombe repeated. "The most important sentences in the letter, Mr. Hartright, are those at the end, which I will read to you immediately. But I can't help dwelling a little upon the coincidence of a white costume of the woman you met, and the white frocks which produced that strange answer from my mother's little scholar. The doctor may have been wrong when he discovered the child's defects of intellect, and predicted that she would grow out of them. She may never have grown out of them, and the old grateful fancy about dressing in white, which was a serious feeling to the girl, may be a serious feeling to the woman still." I said a few words in answer, I hardly know what. All my attention was concentrated on the white gleam of Miss Fairley's muslin dress. "Listen to the last sentences of the letter," said Miss Halcombe. "I think they'll surprise you." As she raised the letter to the light of the candle, Miss Fairley turned from the balustrade, looked doubtfully up and down the terrace, advanced a step towards the glass doors, and then stopped, facing us. Meanwhile, Miss Halcombe read me the last sentences to which she had referred. "And now, my love, seeing that I'm at the end of my paper, now for the real reason, the surprising reason, for my fondness for little Anne Catherick. My dear Philip, although she's not half so pretty, she is, nevertheless, by one of those extraordinary caprices of accidental resemblance which one sometimes sees, the living likeness in her hair, her complexion, the colour of her eyes, and the shape of her face." I started from the ottoman before Miss Halcombe could pronounce the next words. A thrill of the same feeling which ran through me when the touch was laid upon my shoulder on that lonely high road chilled me again. There stood Miss Fairley, a white figure, alone in the moonlight, in her attitude, in the turn of her head, in her complexion, in the shape of her face, the living image, at that distance and under those circumstances, of the woman in white. The doubt which had troubled my mind for hours and hours past flashed into conviction in an instant. That something wanting was my own recognition of the luminous likeness between the fugitive from the asylum and my pupil at Limmeridge House. "You see it," said Miss Halcombe. She dropped the useless letter, and her eyes flashed as they met mine. "You see it now, as my mother saw it 11 years since." "I see it more unwillingly than I can say. To associate that forlorn, friendless, lost woman, even by an accidental likeness only, with Miss Fairley, seems like casting a shadow on the future of the bright creature who stands looking at us now. Let me lose the impression again as soon as possible. Call her in, out of the dreary moonlight. Pray call her in." "Mr. Hartright, you surprise me. Whatever women may be, I thought that men in the 19th century were above superstition." "Pray call her in." "Hush, hush. She's coming of her own accord. Say nothing in her presence. Let this discovery of the likeness be kept a secret between you and me. Come in, Laura, come in. And wake Mrs. Vasey at the piano. Mr. Hartright is petitioning for some more music, and he wants it this time to be of the lightest and liveliest kind." 9. So ended my eventful first day at Limmeridge House. Miss Halcombe and I kept our secret. After the discovery of the likeness, no fresh light seemed destined to break over the mystery of the woman in white. At the first safe opportunity, Miss Halcombe cautiously led her half-sister to speak of her mother, of old times, of Anne Catherick. Miss Fairley's recollections of the little scholar at Limmeridge were, however, only of the vague and general kind. She remembered the likeness between herself and her mother's favourite pupil as something which had been supposed to exist in past times, but she did not refer to the gift of the white dresses, or to the singular form of words in which the child had artlessly expressed her gratitude for them. She remembered that Anne had remained at Limmeridge for a few months only, and had then left it to go back to her home in Hampshire, but she could not say whether the mother and daughter had ever returned, or had ever been heard of afterwards. No further search on Miss Halcombe's part through the few letters of Mrs. Fairley's writing which she had left unread assisted in clearing up the uncertainties still left to perplex us. We had identified the unhappy woman whom I had met in the night time with Anne Catherick, We'd made some advance, at least, towards connecting the probably defective condition of the poor creature's intellect with the peculiarity of her being dressed all in white, and with the continuance in her maturer years of her childish gratitude towards Mrs. Fairlie. And there, so far as we knew at that time, our discoveries had ended. The days passed on, the weeks passed on, and the track of the golden autumn wound its bright way visibly through the green summer of the trees. Peaceful, fast-flowing, happy time. My story glides by you now, as swiftly as you once glided by me. Of all the treasures of enjoyment that you poured so freely into my heart, how much is left me that has purpose and value enough to be written on this page? Nothing but the saddest of all confessions that a man can make, the confession of his own folly. The secret which that confession discloses should be told with little effort, for it has indirectly escaped me already. The poor weak words which have failed to describe Miss Fairlie have succeeded in betraying the sensations she awakened in me. It is so with us all. Our words are giants when they do us an injury, and dwarfs when they do us a service. I loved her. Ah, how well I know all the sadness and all the mockery that's contained in those 3 words. I can sigh over my mournful confession with the tenderest woman who reads it and pities me. I can laugh at it as bitterly as the hardest man who tosses it from him in contempt. I loved her. Feel for me, or despise me, I confess it with the same immovable resolution to own the truth. Was there no excuse for me? There was some excuse to be found, surely, in the conditions under which my term of hired service was passed at Limmeridge House. My morning hours succeeded each other calmly in the quiet and seclusion of my own room. I had just enough work to do in mounting my employer's drawings to keep my hands and eyes pleasurably employed, while my mind was left free to enjoy the dangerous luxury of its own unbridled thoughts. A perilous solitude, for it lasted long enough to enervate, not long enough to fortify me. A perilous solitude, for it was followed by afternoons and evenings spent day after day and week after week alone in the society of 2 women, one of whom possessed all the accomplishments of grace, wit, and high breeding, and the other all the charms of beauty, gentleness, and simple truth that can purify and subdue the heart of man. Not a day passed in that dangerous intimacy of teacher and pupil in which my hand was not close to Miss Fairlie's, my cheek, as we bent together over her sketch-book, almost touching hers. The more attentively she watched every movement of my brush, the more closely I was breathing the perfume of her hair and the warm fragrance of her breath. It was part of my service to live in the very light of her eyes. At one time, to be bending over her, so close to her bosom as to tremble at the thought of touching it. At another, to feel her bending over me, bending so close to see what I was about, that her voice sank low when she spoke to me, and her ribbons brushed my cheek in the wind before she could draw them back. The evenings which followed the sketching excursions of the afternoon varied rather than checked these innocent, these inevitable familiarities. My natural fondness for the music which she played with such tender feeling, such delicate womanly taste, and her natural enjoyment of giving me back, by the practice of her art, the pleasure which I had offered her by the practice of mine, only wove another tie which drew us closer and closer to one another. The accidents of conversation, the simple habits which regulated even such a little thing as the position of our places at table, the play of Miss Halcombe's ever-ready raillery, always directed against my anxiety as teacher, while it sparkled over her enthusiasm as pupil, the harmless expression of poor Mrs. Vace's drowsy approval, which connected Miss Fairlie and me as 2 model young people who never disturbed her, every one of these trifles and many more combined to fold us together in the same domestic atmosphere, and to lead us both insensibly to the same hopeless end. I should have remembered my position, and put myself secretly on my guard. I did so, but not till it was too late. All the discretion, all the experience which had availed me with other women, and secured me against other temptations, failed me with her. It had been my profession for years past to be in this close contact with young girls of all ages and of all orders of beauty. I had accepted the position as part of my calling in life, and had trained myself to leave all the sympathies natural to my age in my employer's outer hall as coolly as I left my umbrella there before I went upstairs. I had long since learnt to understand, composedly, and as a matter of course, that my situation in life was considered a guarantee against any of my female pupils feeling more than the most ordinary interest in me, and that I was admitted among beautiful and captivating women much as a harmless domestic animal is admitted among them. This guardian experience I had gained early. This guardian experience had sternly and strictly guided me straight along my own poor narrow path, without once letting me stray aside, to the right hand or to the left. And now I and my trusty talisman were parted for the first time. Yes, my hardly earned self-control was as completely lost to me as if I had never possessed it. Lost to me, as it is lost every day to other men, in other critical situations where women are concerned. I know now that I should have questioned myself from the first. I should have asked why any room in the house was better than home to me when she entered it, and barren as a desert when she went out again. Why I always noticed and remembered the little changes in her dress that I'd noticed and remembered in no other woman's before. Why I saw her, heard her, and touched her when we shook hands at night and morning, as I had never seen, heard, and touched any other woman in my life. I should have looked into my own heart and found this new growth springing there, and plucked it out while it was young. Why was this easiest, simplest work of self-culture always too much for me? The explanation has been written already in the 3 words that were many enough and plain enough for my confession. I loved her. The days passed. The weeks passed. It was approaching the 3rd month of my stay in Cumberland. The delicious monotony of life in our calm seclusion flowed on with me, like a smooth stream with a swimmer who glides down the current. All memory of the past, all thought of the future, all sense of the falseness and hopelessness of my own position lay hushed within me into deceitful rest, lulled by the siren song that my own heart sung to me. With eyes shut to all sight and ears closed to all sound of danger, I drifted nearer and nearer to the fatal rocks. The warning that aroused me at last and startled me into sudden, self-accusing consciousness of my own weakness was the plainest, the truest, the kindest of all warnings, for it came silently from her. We had parted one night as usual. No word had fallen from my lips at that time or any time before it that could betray me or startle her into sudden knowledge of the truth. But when we met again in the morning, a change had come over her, a change that told me all. I shrank then. I shrink still from invading the innermost sanctuary of her heart and laying it open to others, as I have laid open my own. Let it be enough to say, the time when she first surprised my secret was, I firmly believe, the time when she first surprised her own, and the time also when she changed towards me in the interval of one night. Her nature, too truthful to deceive others, was too noble to deceive itself. When the doubt that I had hushed to sleep first laid its weary weight on her heart, the true face owned all, and said in its own frank, simple language, "I'm sorry for him. I'm sorry for myself." It said this, and more, which I could not then interpret. I understood but too well the change in her manner, to greater kindness and quicker readiness in interpreting all my wishes before others, to constraint and sadness and nervous anxiety to absorb herself in the first occupation she could seize on, whenever we happened to be left together alone. I understood why the sweet, sensitive lips smiled so rarely and so restrainedly now, and why the clear blue eyes looked at me, sometimes with the pity of an angel, sometimes with the innocent perplexity of a child. But the change meant more than this. There was a coldness in her hand. There was an unnatural immobility in her face. There was in all her movements the mute expression of constant fear and clinging self-reproach. The sensations that I could trace to herself and to me, the unacknowledged sensations that we were feeling in common, were not these. There were certain elements of the change in her that were still secretly drawing us together, and others that were as secretly beginning to drive us apart. In my doubt and perplexity, in my vague suspicion of something hidden, which I was left to find by my own unaided efforts, I examined Miss Halcombe's looks and manner for enlightenment. Living in such intimacy as ours, no serious alteration could take place in any one of us, which did not sympathetically affect the others. The change in Miss Fairlie was reflected in her half-sister. Although not a word escaped Miss Halcombe which hinted at an altered state of feeling towards myself, her penetrating eyes had contracted a new habit of always watching me. Sometimes the look was like suppressed anger, sometimes like suppressed dread, sometimes like neither, like nothing, in short, which I could understand. A week elapsed, leaving us all three still in this position of secret constraint towards one another. My situation, aggravated by the sense of my own miserable weakness and forgetfulness of myself, now too late awakened in me, was becoming intolerable. I felt that I must cast off the oppression under which I was living, at once and for ever, and yet how to act for the best, or what to say first, was more than I could tell. From this position of helplessness and humiliation I was rescued by Miss Halcombe. Her lips told me the bitter, the necessary, the unexpected truth. Her hearty kindness sustained me under the shock of hearing it. Her sense and courage turned to its right use an event which threatened the worst that could happen, to me and to others in Limmeridge House.
End of Track 3.